My phone lit up at 6:47 in the morning. I didn't answer it. That was the day before Thanksgiving. My sister-in-law had been calling me every day for 2 weeks straight, always before 7, always about the house. I knew what she wanted. She'd been wanting it since the day we buried my husband. I made coffee instead. I stood at the kitchen window and watched my daughter chase the cat around the backyard, still in her pajamas, her hair a disaster. And I thought, okay, I can do this. I can get through one more holiday. I was wrong about that. My husband Garrett, my late husband, he passed 14 months before that Thanksgiving. Pancreatic cancer. 41 years old, never smoked, ran half marathons, ate vegetables I couldn't pronounce. Gone in 7 months from diagnosis to burial. Our daughter Macy had just turned 9. The house was his, technically. His grandmother had left it to him in her will, a 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street in western Pennsylvania, paid off, worth somewhere around $380,000 by the time he died. Before he passed, he had his attorney draw up everything properly. The house transferred to me. There was also a life insurance policy, $450,000, that named me as sole beneficiary. He had updated it 3 months before he died, when we realized the end was coming faster than the doctors first said. His family knew about the house. They didn't know the exact insurance number, but they knew it wasn't small. His mother started in on me about 6 weeks after the funeral. Not aggressively at first, more like suggestions. Wouldn't it be nice if she could move into the guest room? She was getting older. Her knees were bad, and of course, she'd help with Maisie. Then his sister started calling. His brother sent emails. By spring, the message had shifted from hints to something harder. The house had been in the family for 30 years. His grandmother would have wanted the family to keep it together. Surely I understood that. I understood it fine. I just didn't agree with it. The thing is, I liked his family. I had liked them for 11 years, since I was 24 years old and nervous at Christmas. And his mother had handed me a glass of wine and told me to relax. I was doing great. I liked his sister's loud laugh and his brother's terrible puns. I had chosen these people, the same way I had chosen him. But grief does something to people. Or maybe money does. I'm still not sure which one it was for them. My mother-in-law called it a family meeting. That was the phrase she used when she invited me to Thanksgiving. A family meeting. I should have caught that. I should have heard the edge in it. But I was tired. 14 months of tired, and I told myself I was being paranoid, that she was his mother, that she was grieving too, and that the holidays were hard enough without adding distance to them. I asked my own mother to come with me. She lives 3 hours away in Ohio, and she said yes without hesitating. She arrived the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, helped me braid Macy's hair, ate takeout with us on the couch, and told me she had a feeling about the next day. I said, what kind of feeling? She said, just a feeling. Be careful. I said, okay, Mom. His family's house is a 40-minute drive. We got there around 2 in the afternoon, and the driveway was already full of cars. That was the first thing I noticed. His aunt and uncle from Ohio, his cousin who I'd only met twice, a woman I didn't recognize at all, standing near the front door in a dark blazer, holding a leather folder. My mother touched my arm. She didn't say anything. Inside, the house smelled like it always had. Cinnamon, old wood smoke, the specific warmth of a house where people have lived for decades. His mother hugged me at the door. She called me sweetheart, the way she always had. She told Maisie she had grown at least 3 inches. Everything looked normal. It wasn't normal. We sat down to eat around 4. There were 14 people at the table. I was at the end, near the window, with Maisie beside me. My mother was across from us. The woman with the leather folder was sitting near my father-in-law, and I finally asked my sister-in-law quietly who she was. She said, "Oh, that's a family friend. She's in real estate." I looked at the leather folder. I looked at my sister-in-law. I didn't say anything yet. We got through most of the meal. Turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes. Maisie ate 2 rolls and fell asleep against my arm for about 10 minutes before jerking awake again. My father-in-law told a story about a hunting trip from 30 years ago. His aunt cried a little, talking about my husband, the way she always did, and I held her hand across the corner of the table because I understood crying about him. Then my mother-in-law stood up. She said she wanted to talk about something important as a family. She said it was something they had all been discussing, and that they hoped I would hear them out. I felt my mother shift in her chair. My father-in-law cleared his throat and said that the house I was living in, my house, had been in the family for 31 years. That his mother, my husband's grandmother, had meant it as a family legacy. That they believed, and he paused here, chose his words carefully, that the current arrangement wasn't what she would have intended. I said, "What current arrangement?" He said, "With it belonging to just one person." I said, "It belonged to your son. He left it to me." "That's not an arrangement. That's a will." His sister leaned forward. She said they weren't trying to take anything. They were proposing a solution. She slid a piece of paper across the table toward me. I looked down at it. It was a drafted agreement. My name was already typed at the top. It proposed transferring the deed of my house into a family trust, with myself listed as a resident with usage rights but no ownership stake. In exchange, I would receive a monthly payment of $1,200. My house was worth $380,000. My house was worth $380,000. I looked at the paper for a long time. I could hear Maisie breathing next to me. I could feel my mother across the table like a presence, like a held breath. I said, "Where did this come from?" The woman in the blazer spoke for the first time. She said she had helped draft it. She said it was a very fair arrangement and that it protected everyone involved. I said, "It doesn't protect me." My father-in-law said, "We're not trying to hurt you. You have the insurance money. You don't need the house the same way the family does." I said, "The insurance money is for my daughter." My mother-in-law said, "And the family would help with Maisie. That was part of the arrangement, that we would all be closer, more connected." She said it like she was offering me something good. I looked at her and for 1 second, I thought she believed that. I thought maybe she had convinced herself this was generosity. I said, "I'm not signing this." The table got very quiet. My sister-in-law said I was being selfish. She said my husband would have wanted the family to stay together, and that this house was part of that. I said, "My husband left me the house because he wanted me and our daughter to be secure. I know what he wanted. I was there." Her voice went up. She said I had always been difficult, that I had never really made an effort with his family, that now I was using his death to cut them out. I said that wasn't true. She said, "You've been planning this for months, haven't you? Figured out how to get everything and leave us with nothing?" I said, "There is nothing to get. It's my house." My father-in-law stood up. He looked exhausted and angry in that way that older men do when they've lost control of something they expected to control. He said, "Maybe it would be better if you left tonight." He said, "Come back when you're ready to have a real conversation." He said it to me. Maisie was awake. She was looking at her grandfather and then at me, and her face had gone very still in that specific way children's faces go when they are trying to understand something that doesn't make sense yet. I looked at my father-in-law, a man I had known for 11 years, a man who had walked me down the aisle when my own father couldn't make it, a man I had called on a Tuesday in September to tell him his son was gone, and I said, "Okay, just that." "Okay." I picked up my purse. I helped Maisie with her jacket. I looked at my mother and she was already standing. My sister-in-law said, "Think about what you're throwing away." I said, "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm going home." We walked out. In the car, Maisie didn't say anything for the first 10 minutes. She watched the dark fields go past the window. My mother was in the back seat with her, holding her hand, and the radio was off. Then Maisie said, "Mama, were they mad at you?" I said, "A little bit, yeah." She said, "Because of the house?" I said, "Yes." She was quiet for another mile. Then she said, "It's our house though." I said, "It is." She said, "Okay." And then she leaned into my mom and went to sleep. My mother didn't say anything until we were back on the highway. Then she said, "I need to tell you something." She said, "I've been waiting because I wanted to be sure, and now I'm sure." I said, "What is it?" She said, "I've been talking to Dale. Dale was my husband's family attorney, the one who had drawn up the will, who had handled the estate, who I had met with twice after the funeral to understand the paperwork. I hadn't spoken to him in months. My mother said she had run into him at a courthouse in March, completely by accident. She had mentioned she was worried about me. He had been careful, professional, but he had said enough for her to understand that there was something I needed to know. She had spent the next 7 months figuring out whether she had the right to tell me. I said, "Mom, just say it." She said, "Dale has emails. Between your in-laws and a real estate attorney, not the woman tonight, a different one, from back in the spring. They were trying to challenge the will. They wanted to argue that the house should revert to the family estate. That your husband had been," she paused, "that he hadn't been of sound mind when he updated the will because of the medication he was on. The medication he was on because he was dying." I didn't say anything for a long time. She said, "Dale documented everything. He kept records. He said that if they ever moved forward with it, he had everything he needed to defend the will completely. They hadn't filed anything. He thought they might have backed off. But tonight," she looked at me, "tonight looked like Plan B." I said, "They were going to get me to sign away the house voluntarily, because they knew they couldn't win in court." She said, "That's what it looks like." I pulled over. Not because I was going to fall apart, I wasn't, not yet, but because I needed 30 seconds of stopped. I put the car in park on the shoulder of the highway, and I pressed my hands flat against the steering wheel, and I breathed. My daughter was asleep in the back seat. The fields were dark on both sides of the road, and I thought about my husband, spending some of his last weeks making sure the paperwork was right, making sure Maisie and I would be okay, and I thought about what his family had been doing with those same weeks. I thought about his mother calling me sweetheart at the door. Then I put the car back in drive. I called Dale first thing Friday morning. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he had been expecting my call. I told him what had happened at Thanksgiving. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. And then he said, very calmly, the way lawyers talk when they want to be precise, that he had been hoping I would call. He said the emails he had documented showed a clear pattern of intent to contest the will, and that presenting them in court, should it come to that, would not be difficult. He said he also believed that what had occurred the previous evening, asking me to sign a legal document transferring my property, with a drafted agreement and a real estate professional present, in a setting designed to create social pressure, constituted an attempt at coercion. He used that word specifically. I wrote it down. Coercion. He said, "I want you to understand that you are on very solid legal ground. I also want you to understand that you don't have to respond to any of this alone." I said, "What do I do now?" He said, "That's your decision. But if I were advising you, I'd say you send one clear message. Not angry, not detailed, just clear." I thought about that. That afternoon, I sent a single email to my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and my sister-in-law. I copied Dale. It said, "I am aware of the correspondence from this spring regarding the estate. I have legal counsel, and I have documentation. The house and the estate are settled. I will not be signing any agreements. I wish you well, and I ask that going forward, any communication regarding legal or financial matters be directed to my attorney." I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter. Maisie was at the table eating cereal. She had her library book propped against the milk carton, already in her own world. The cat was asleep on the radiator. The morning light was coming through the window the way it always did on clear November mornings, yellow and thin and quiet. I made coffee. I sat down. I read the back of the cereal box because Maisie had claimed the book. My phone buzzed. I turned it over. It was my mother-in-law. The message was long. I read the first line. "I don't know what Dale has told you, but that is not the full picture," and then I put it back down. It buzzed again. My sister-in-law. Then my father-in-law. They kept coming for 3 days. Explanations, then justifications, then something that was trying to be an apology but couldn't quite get there because it kept circling back to what they felt they deserved. My mother-in-law called 4 times. My sister-in-law sent 11 texts. The brother who had been quiet through all of it sent one email that was just 2 sentences. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it had gone this far." I didn't respond to any of them. Not out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that. I thought carefully about it, actually. I sat with Maisie's drawings all over the refrigerator, and the cat asleep on the couch, and the house that my husband had made sure would be ours. And I thought about what responding would mean, what door it would open. What I was actually hoping for from them. I couldn't think of an answer. Dale sent a formal letter on my behalf in early December, restating that the estate was settled and that any further legal action would be met with full documentation of their previous correspondence. He also noted, briefly and factually, that the attempt on Thanksgiving to have me sign an unauthorized property transfer agreement might itself be worth examining. He told me later they called his office the same afternoon. The letter arrived. They didn't file anything. Christmas came. Maisie asked if we were going to Grandma and Grandpa's house, and I said no, not this year, and she looked at me with that clear, serious look she has sometimes and said, "Is it because of the thing at Thanksgiving?" I said, "Yeah, kind of." She thought about that. Then she said, "Are they bad people?" I didn't know how to answer that honestly without making it complicated in ways a 9-year-old shouldn't have to carry. So I said, "I think they got scared and made some bad choices. I think those are different things." She seemed to accept that. She went back to her book. We spent Christmas at my mother's house in Ohio. We made sugar cookies and watched old movies. And Maisie slept in the pull-out bed in my old childhood bedroom. And I sat up late the first night with my mother drinking tea and just being quiet together in the way that you can be with someone who has known you your whole life. She said, "How are you doing?" Not as a question exactly, more like an opening. I said, "I think I'm okay. I think I'm actually okay." She said, "He would have handled this the same way you did." I didn't say anything to that. But I held on to it. It's been almost 8 months since Thanksgiving. I'm still in the house. Maisie is in 4th grade and has opinions about everything and recently decided she wants to be a marine biologist. The cat knocked an entire pot of soup off the stove last Tuesday, and I was so tired that I just stood there looking at it on the floor for a full minute before I cleaned it up. My mother-in-law sent a card in April. No return address, just a postcard with a picture of a lake on the front. On the back, in her handwriting, it said, "I think about you and Maisie often. I'm sorry for what happened." Just that. 11 words. I put it in the drawer with the other things I'm not ready to deal with yet. Maisie's first tooth, a napkin from our first date, the grocery list he left on the counter the last morning he drove himself to the doctor. Maybe someday. Not now. What I know now that I didn't know 14 months ago is this. People who love you can still do things that are wrong. Not evil, not calculated, just wrong. Scared and grieving and wrong. And you can understand that about them without letting it rewrite what happened. My husband spent some of his last energy making sure I would be standing in this kitchen, making this coffee, watching this kid grow up in this house. That's not an arrangement. That's not an asset in a family trust. That's a man who loved us. I don't need a family meeting to understand that. I never did. I've thought a lot about what actually happened that Thanksgiving. Not the part at the dinner table. I've turned that over enough times. But what happened before it? What had to happen, over months, quietly, for the truth to be ready when it was needed? Dale kept those emails for 7 months. My mother sent me a bill for $7. I pay Aunt Adasawai. She sat with what she knew for most of a year, waiting until she was sure. None of that was planned. None of it was coordinated. It was just people being careful and honest and paying attention, and all of it arrived at exactly the right moment. I used to think that was luck. I don't think that anymore. What I think now is that the choices you make in the small moments, the ones no one is watching, are the ones that actually shape what happens to you later. My husband spent some of his last good weeks making sure the paperwork was in order. Not because he thought his family would do what they did, I don't think he imagined that. He did it because he was thorough and he was careful, and he loved us in a practical, unglamorous way that showed up in documents and signed forms and a phone call to a lawyer on a Tuesday afternoon. That carefulness protected Maisie and me when we couldn't protect ourselves. And what his family did, the emails in the spring, the drafted agreement, the real estate woman with the leather folder at a holiday dinner, all of that came from a different kind of choice. Fear, probably. Grief, maybe. The feeling that something was slipping away and that the right response was to grab for it. Those choices didn't protect them. They just revealed them. I'm not interested in judging them for it, not anymore, but I do think about the mechanics of it. About how the things people do in private have a way of becoming visible eventually. Not as punishment. Not as some force of cosmic correction, just because actions leave evidence, and evidence accumulates, and the world is smaller and more connected than we remember when we think no one is watching. Maisie asked me once if I was sad that things were different now with her grandparents. I told her the truth. Yes, a little. I had liked those people. I still have years of real memories with them that I don't know what to do with. That sadness is real, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But I also told her this, and I meant it, that walking out of that house on Thanksgiving night without begging, without signing, without shrinking myself down to make anyone more comfortable, was one of the most important things I've ever done. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't. It was quiet. It was just putting on a jacket and saying okay and walking to the car. The important part was that I knew what I was walking toward. My house. My daughter. The life my husband built carefully and intentionally for us. That was worth walking toward. Maisie is going to grow up knowing what that looks like. Someone who stands still when the pressure comes, who doesn't panic, who trusts the groundwork that has already been laid. I hope she carries that. I hope when she is 33 and tired and something tries to take what is hers, she remembers that staying calm is not the same as giving up. That quiet and strong are not opposites. That you don't have to raise your voice to hold your ground. That's the only lesson I know how to pass on, not from a book, not from something I was taught. Just from a Thursday night in November, driving home in the dark with my daughter asleep in the back seat, and knowing for the first time in 14 months that we were going to be okay.